welcome back to my channel, Beautiful Minutia. If you're new here, my name is Tiffany, and today I am doing my wrap-up for the month of September. Normally, I do my wrap-ups in my library, but right now this is an easier filming location for you, so we get a more scenic setting. So in the month of September, I think I finished 8 books. I think that count is correct. It might actually be more than that because I think I finished a book or 2 with my daughter for school, but I'm not including that in this wrap-up. This is just books that I read by myself of my own choosing. It sounds like 8 is a great number, but I really feel like I didn't read a ton, honestly, because I had 3 books that were over 500 pages that I finished this month, one of which I had already gotten over halfway through before I started, but the other 2 definitely not. So I have a couple of shorter works and then also some manga. And so I think that that's the only reason that my reading number of books finished is as high as it was, because without the manga and the short ones, it would have been like 3 books. So I'm gonna go ahead and share what I enjoyed, what I didn't enjoy this month. I think that I'm gonna start with my least favorite and work my way up, although some of these are kind of like tied. Overall, I had a decent reading month. I think that, I had a couple of 3 stars and a couple of 4 stars and a couple of 5 stars. So nothing overly terrible, and a couple things that I really, really, really loved. So at the bottom of the stack is actually, I can't find it. I don't know where I said it, but that would be The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. You may have already seen, I already posted a reading vlog that has my very in-depth thoughts in that. So if you're interested, you can check that out. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I thought it was going to be a new favorite, honestly, because I just really, really loved the writing style, and I really loved the historical setting and just a lot of the philosophical and religious conversations that were happening. But there were other things within it that just really ended up bogging the book down for me, and it felt super bloated. So it's actually about this monastery in the 1300s, and there is someone who has died, and the death looks super suspicious. So the man in charge of this monastery actually calls in Brother William, who used to be an inquisitor, to come in and kind of investigate. And Brother William, the way that he kind of deduces things is very much like Sherlock, which was really interesting and fun to watch. And he brings someone he's mentoring with him, Adso, who is our narrator. And the body count keeps rising as the days go on. The novel is set up into days, and then each day has different time periods throughout the day. So it's set up over the course of 7 days as they're investigating this crime, but it's very, very slow, and it's not really, doesn't really focus on the mystery as much as you might think, especially if you read the back of the book. It makes it sound super interesting and super exciting, but it's definitely much more focused on the philosophical and religious conversations that are happening, as well as the historical context. So that overall, some of those conversations really dragged out and made it feel a lot more bloated. And also there was just a lot of very pervasive sexual content for the second half of the book that just felt very consuming. It wasn't super graphic. It just felt annoying because it felt like our narrator was not able to move past this focus on sexual desires and sexual urges, and that was just annoying. And it ended up really dragging the book down for me quite a bit. So the first half of the book I really liked, and the second half of the book I struggled with more. Next up on this list is a 4 star, I guess I would probably say that it is. And that book is one that I read for an in-person book club and also ended up reading with my sister, so that was really fun. And that's Killers of the Flower Moon by David Grann. You've probably heard of this because there is a movie that is coming out very soon. It may have come out by the time this video comes out, because it comes out sometime in October, but I don't remember exactly when. But it has Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro in it, so directed by Martin Scorsese, so I'm sure that there's a lot of people really looking forward to watching it. So this is about some murders that took place in, I think, the 1920s of this Native American tribe who was forced onto this land, and then the land that they're forced onto is an area that the white people didn't want at all, but lo and behold, it is actually full of oil. And once that is discovered, these Native Americans become millionaires. And so there's this plot that is uncovered of these Native Americans who continually keep dying. It's suspected that the reasoning behind that is so that way people can receive the head rights to these lands and to to their money, but the FBI ends up getting involved, and it's actually technically before it was entitled the FBI, and right around the time that J. Edgar Hoover took over this Bureau of Investigation. And so it's kind of like a last-ditch effort to save the reputation of the FBI at the time. And so there was a lot of pressure placed on the investigator to figure out what was going on. This is written very much like a true crime book. For the first 2 sections, it's split into 3 sections. The last section, to me, reads much more like a journalistic endeavor, and the author is someone who actually is a journalist. So that kind of makes sense that it takes that tone, but as a result, it felt disjointed for me from the rest of the book. And so I felt like I could have done without a lot of that last section. I feel like he could have put it in as an epilogue or an author's note instead of it being kind of as long as it was, because tonally it's totally different. It takes place in, you know, modern day and stuff, but it's really interesting the way that he writes it. He doesn't tell you the conclusion, so you're trying to figure out what's going on along with the people who are investigating it, which is interesting. Overall, I really liked this. I thought it was really interesting. It's about a time period and an event that we don't really ever talk about, and we really should. Next up, we have Fathers and Sons by Ivan Turgenev. This is a very short Russian classic that was super interesting to read, and I really, really loved this. My Patreon paired up with the Short Classics for Charity Book Club, which is run by Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, and so we got together and discussed this, and I really, really liked it a lot. It was a lot more readable than I thought it was. I really liked the conversations that were happening, and it definitely wasn't perfect for me. It didn't have the depth and complexity that I often am looking for in Russian literature, because like this doesn't hold a candle to Dostoevsky, to be honest. But I still really, really enjoyed it and felt like it was a gap in my Russian literature that needed to be filled. This book was written to kind of address the divide, like the generational divide that was happening between, you know, different viewpoints, and also to kind of address the growing popularity of nihilism in Russia at the time. And Turgenev actually kind of popularized the phrase nihilism, which I thought was really interesting. And then in response to this book, What Is to Be Done was written, and then Dostoevsky wrote Notes from the Underground, and also kind of Demons was also kind of directed towards this conversation, which I think is really interesting because I read Demons earlier this year, and it's one of my favorite books that I've read so far this year. And so it's really fun to read books that are in conversation with one another, and a lot of Russian literature does that. So I'm so happy that I read this one. Next up, I read several volumes of Attack on Titan 3, 4, and 5. So I'm not really going to talk too much about this. One of these was more of a 3-star for me. One was like a 4 and one was like a 5. So this kind of ranged all over the place for me, which is why I'm putting it here in my ranking. I am really, really enjoying this manga series. It is not the kind of thing that I would normally read, but it's really interesting. I'm reading this with Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, and there's a lot of like cliffhangers and things that are happening at the end of these volumes that make me just want to keep reading. I'm really enjoying the character development so far. The last 2 books that I want to talk about are actually, I can't really decide which one is my favorite of the 2. I really love them both very solid 5-star books for me. So the first one I'm going to talk about is actually one that I started at the end of July and just now finished, and that is Oathbringer from Brandon Sanderson. This is from the Stormlight Archive, book 3, and oh my word, I don't even know what to say about this book just because it is a 3rd book in a series, but absolutely just adored this book. So far, this is my favorite book of the Stormlight Archive, which is shocking to me because most people say Words of Radiance is their favorite, but I think the reason I enjoyed this one so much more is because I didn't feel lost like I did for Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. A normal person would not feel lost during Words of Radiance, but a normal person would not wait like 8-9 months in between them and have forgotten a lot of what happened in Way of Kings. So that's what happened to me, and that didn't happen with Oathbringer. I felt like I was able to hit the ground running and I hadn't forgotten things because it had only been like a couple of months, maybe like 2-3 months in between, and so it was so much more enjoyable for that. I loved the character development that was happening. There were so many interesting reveals, so many things that I thought that were turned on their head. And Brandon Sanderson's world building and characterization is just incredible. Like, I just love him so much. This book is the longest one in the Stormlight Archive so far that I've read, but I think Rhythm of War might actually be longer. And I'm starting that one in November. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that because I think book 5 comes out next year. I know a lot of people say that Kaladin is their favorite character, and I get that. I think Kaladin's amazing. I've never heard anyone say that Shallan's their favorite character, and I get that. I always thought that her magic was the most interesting, and I stand by that. I still think that her abilities are more interesting, but this was the first book that she actually like super irritated me. I know a lot of people are irritated with her the whole way through, and that was not the case for me. But Dalinar, can we just talk about Dalinar? He's my favorite. He's for sure my favorite. And I had a suspicion that he was, but I did really love Kaladin. And it's not like I disliked Kaladin in this book because I still loved him. But like, Dalinar's the best. I'm sorry. My neighbor is like riding around on his four-wheeler and I don't really know what he's doing. So there's some background noise. Sorry, but we're almost done, so I'm not going to stop here and start over when it's quieter. The last book I want to talk about is the last book that I finished this month, and oh my word, it blew me away. I read it with a subscriber friend, Victoria, and Jonathan Strange and Mr Norrell by Susanna Clark. My Patreon is getting an exclusive vlog for this video coming out soon, so I'm not gonna like go on and on about it, even though I could. I made a whole video of me talking about it like a lot, but suffice it to say, this book is everything I wanted it to be and more. So if you are looking for something this fall that is very like creepy, gothic, atmospheric, but is slow burn, this is for you. I know it's giant, and I think that some people feel the length. I overall didn't really. There was points in the middle where it lagged a little bit for me, where there are some more scenes, because it is like an alternate historical kind of a thing. So it's about two magicians in England, and they're coming along when England hasn't performed any magic in a long time. There are a lot of magicians, but they just study the history of magic and they talk about magic. No one has actually been a practical magician in centuries. And so there ends up being, you know, the relationship developing between the two magicians, people comparing them because they're very different. Towards the beginning of the book, there is a scene that happens that requires someone to call on the magical aid of a fairy. And fairies in this book are not sweet little Tinkerbell fairies. They are evil, and it's really, really interesting because it really felt like a Faustian deal. And so I'm like, are they supposed to be demons? I'm not really sure, but it's just really interesting examination on greed and arrogance, on fear, on, you know, wanting notoriety, on messing with powers that you absolutely do not understand, and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of interesting conversations to be had here, and I had a lot of those conversations with my buddy reader, and that was just fantastic because when I finished this book, I was loving so much of it, and then there's, you know, like the climactic scene, and I was just kind of like, wait, what? But I also was reading it when I was like really exhausted. My husband had surgery that day and I was operating on very little sleep. And so I'm like, maybe I'm just missing something. So I slept on it, and then I like listened to her Voxer, and like something clicked in my brain, and we just had the most incredible conversations about it. And it was one that like provoked a lot of thought in me and had like so much parallel to spiritual truths that were just like mind-blowing and beautifully done for me. And both of us said that we could see this becoming a classic, like a book that, you know, years and years from now people are talking about. And it has a classic feel already just in the way that it's written, because it kind of feels very Dickensian, which is what people told me. They told me it was like, oh, it's like Dickens but with magic. And some of the ways that it feels even more Dickensian, besides just the style of the way that it's written, is also there's like these pictures in it, which reminds me of like Penguin classics and all that kind of stuff. But there's quite a few pictures, and then in addition to that, there is so many like footnotes. Like here's another nice, really creepy picture. There are footnotes telling you about like magical history and things that they're referencing with fairies and stuff, which really felt like when you have the Penguins classic and you like flip to the back and you're like, oh, they're referencing this thing that I didn't know. And so like that was so interesting the way that she chose to do this. I realize that people have polarizing opinions on this, particularly because of the length, but it just wowed me from start to finish. And I really think that the timing in which I read it was amazing. This is a perfect fall book. So this is for my September wrap up. You can read this in October and November, and it's gonna give you those perfect like spooky fall vibes where it's just unsettling. Although I will say the last third of the book for sure gets incredibly dark, but it's just so good. It's just so good. I really, really highly recommend this one. It exceeded my very high expectations, and I'm really looking forward to being able to read Piranesi by the same author, because a lot of people who didn't like this one, they liked that one because it's a more tight story and it's shorter. So I think that this is a masterpiece in its own right, but I'm really interested to read Piranesi and compare the two. Well, there you have it. Those are the books that I read in the month of September. Some that I had mixed feelings on, some that I absolutely adored with all my heart. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below if you've read any of these books. What were your thoughts? Were they similar? Were they different? And also, please tell me what your favorite book of the month was for September. I hope that you had a really good reading month. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like and also subscribe so you can continue to see more bookish content from me, and I will see you again next time.